Hi friends, so today we're gonna talk about very important SQL concepts, the subqueries. We're gonna cover all the different types of subqueries and as well the different operators that are typically used in subqueries like comparison, in, any, all, exists, and we will learn how SQL execute the subqueries step by step. So let's start with the first question. What is subquery? Hi friends, I just checked the YouTube statistics and it says, since the creation of this channel, over 70% of you still watching the videos and the content frequently without subscribing. So here's the deal. If you ever enjoyed watching my contents, please subscribe. It's gonna help the channel more than I can explain, and I promise in return, I'm gonna keep pushing on making high quality videos about data. Do we have a deal? Alright, let's go back to the video. Subquery is a query inside another query. So what this means, let's have a sketch to understand it. So far what we have learned, we have different database tables like the orders, customers, and so on, and we write a simple SQL queries like select from where. So the SQL gonna retrieve data from the database tables, and in the output we will get some kind of results. So this is so far what we have done. We have done very simple queries. Now in our query we can have things little bit different. So we could have another query that is inside our query where we do the same things like select from where. So we have now a query inside our query, and we call this embedded query, we call it a subquery. And the original query, the first one where we have select from, we call it main query. So now if you execute the whole query, what can happen, SQL first gonna go and select the subquery and then it's gonna execute it. So it's gonna go and select and retrieve data from our database tables, and the result of the subquery will not be sent to the users, to us, so we cannot see it. What can happen, the result can stay inside the query as an intermediate result, and then now our main query can go and start interacting with this intermediate result from the subquery. So the main query gonna do some kind of operations on top of this intermediate results and use it for filtering or joining or any purpose, and still the main query can go and query the original database tables. So now the main query has two sources for data, the original database tables and as well the result from another query. So now by looking to this, you can see the subquery is a query inside the main query, and it's play a role of supporter. So it supports the main query with data, and the main job of the main query is of course to get all those data and to show us at the end the final results. Now there is now two things about this intermediate results that we got as a result from the subquery. Once the execution of the query is completely done, what can happen is SQL gonna go and destroy this intermediate result, so it's gonna totally drop it, so we will not find it anywhere, it's completely lost. Now the other thing about the intermediate results is that imagine you are making another query that is completely outside of the first query. We are selecting few tables from our database. Now you might say, you know what? Is it possible to access the intermediate results from the first query? So now we are talking about completely external query. You cannot do that. The intermediate result of the subquery is only locally known from the main query itself, and it is not globally available for any other query. So the subquery can be used only from the main query. So with that, we have understood what are subqueries, and now you might ask me, why do we need them in the first place? Why subqueries are important? Let's have the following sketch. Now in our complex task, we might have to do several stuffs in our query. Like for example, the first step, we have to go and join tables in order to prepare the data, and then the outcome of the joins should be filtered. So this is going to be our step 2. And then on top of that, in the step 3, we have to go and do transformations, like maybe handling the nulls or creating new columns and many other stuff. And the last step, we want to go and do data aggregations, like summarizing the data or finding average. Now if you go immediately and start writing the SQL query without having a plan, what can happen? You're gonna end up having a long complex SQL query, and it's going to be really hard to write and as well to understand and read. And now what we can do instead of that, we're going to go and divide our task based on those steps. So we're going to write one query section for each step. For example, for joining tables, we're going to have one query, for filtering another one, transformation another one, and for the aggregation we're going to have the last query. So now since each step is like a preparation for the next step, we can go and say each of those queries is a subquery. So for step 1, step 2, step 3, we have subqueries, and they are all doing like calculations and preparations for the last step to the aggregations, and we call the last step the main query. And of course, the whole thing can exist in one single query. So if you want to visual this, like you have a subquery in circle, and then this circle belongs to a bigger circle called the main query. By the way, sometimes we call the main query as the outer query, and the subquery we can call it an inner query. And of course, we can have many subqueries and many small circles inside each others to form something called nested queries. So this is the main purpose of using subqueries in our scripts and queries. It's gonna help us to reduce the complexity and gonna make it easier to read, and we can have like a flow, logical flow inside our queries. Now for the subqueries, there are many different types and categories. So now what we're gonna do, I'm gonna show you an overview of all those types and categories, and then later we're gonna deep dive into each of those types. So first of all, if we are thinking about the dependencies between the subquery and the main query, there is mainly two types of subqueries. We have the non-correlated subquery. That means the subquery is independent from the main query. And the second type is the correlated subquery. It's exactly the opposite. The subquery gonna depend on the main query. Of course, we can explain all those stuff in details, don't worry about it. So this is the first group. Now there is another group on how to group up the subqueries depending on the result type. So I mean with this that the subquery has different outputs and results. For example, we have scalar subquery. It returns only one single value. Or another type, it's called the row subquery. It's gonna return multiple rows. And the final type called the table subquery. It is a subquery that returns multiple rows and as well multiple columns. Now we come to the third way and the last way on how to categorize the subqueries, and this time based on the location and the clauses. So we are describing here where the subquery gonna be used within the main query. So we can use it in different locations and clauses like the select clause, or we can use it in the from clause, and this is the most common type for the subqueries, or we can use it before joining tables, and we can use it in order to filter the data in the where clause. And in the where clause, as we learned, there are two different sets of operators. We can use the subquery together with the comparison operators, the less, greater, equal, and so on, or we can use it with the logical operators like the in, any, all, and exists. So now those are the different types and categories for the subqueries, and we're gonna now deep dive into all of them. So now let's go and start with the easiest category, the result types of the subqueries. Now we have different types of subqueries based on the results. So this means the amount of data that the subquery can return. So the first type is the scalar subquery. So it is a subquery that it's gonna return only one single value, like for example the value 3. Let's have an example for the scalar subquery. So in this query, for example, if you are saying select star, you will get all columns, all the rows from one table. But for the scalar subquery, we need only one value. So how we usually get it is by doing some aggregations. For example, if you go and say let's get the average of sales, so let's execute it, and with that in the output we have only one value, the 38. We call such a query as a scalar query. So it has only one row and only one column. So this is a scalar query. Alright, so now to the second type, we have the row subquery. So it is a subquery that's gonna return multiple rows and a single column. So we're gonna have like values 1, 2, 3. So it is only one column with multiple rows. Let's have an example for the row query. As you can see now, we are saying select star from the table orders, and now we are getting multiple rows and multiple columns. But for the row queries, we need only one column. So you can go over here, for example, say customer ID, and if you go and execute it, so now if you check the output, we have a single column and as well multiple rows. So we have like a list of values, and this is what we call a row query. Alright, so now to the last type, we have the table subquery. It's gonna go and return multiple rows and as well multiple columns like any regular tables. So this subquery gonna return a lot of values. Okay, so let's see an example of that table query. So if you check our example here, select star from orders, we got here multiple rows and as well multiple columns. And of course we can go and select multiple columns, like for example the order ID and the order date. So if we execute it, here in the output, we have multiple columns. We have 2 columns and as well multiple rows. That's why this kind of query is as well a table query. Alright, so with that, we have learned the different types of subqueries based on the result type. Now we're gonna go and learn how to use the subqueries in different locations in our query. So we're gonna start with how to use subquery in the from clause. Okay, so we typically use the subqueries in the from clause in order to create temporary result sets that act as a table for the main query. So it's like in some scenarios we cannot use the tables directly from the database. We have to prepare it somehow before we do our actual query. Okay, so let's check the syntax of the subquery inside the from clause. So we start with the usual stuff where we go and say select and few columns that we want to retrieve. And then we say, okay, from. Usually after the from comes the table name from our database that we want to query. But this time, instead of writing the table name, we're gonna have another SQL query. So that means we don't define the table name, we define another select statement where we have as well again select a column from specific table, and then maybe we have a filter. And in order now to tell SQL this is a subquery, we have to use the parentheses. So we're gonna have the parentheses at the start and at the end. This is a subquery, this is not the main query. And after the parentheses, we can go and define the alias for the results that we're gonna get from this subquery. In many databases, this alias is an optional, but for the SQL Server, we have to go and specify an alias. So it is a must in SQL Server. So again, we call this a subquery, and the outer query, we call it a main query. So this is the syntax of the subquery in the from clause. Okay, so now we have the following task, and it says find the products that have a price higher than the average price of all products. So we're gonna do it step by step, and here we have 2 steps. The first one is that we have to go and calculate the average price of all products, and the second step, we're gonna use this value in order to filter the table products in order to find the prices that is higher than this average price. So let's start with the first step where we're gonna find the average price. I'm gonna select the following informations. So product ID, price, from the table, sales, products. So let's go and execute it. So now we have the product and as well the prices, and we need this price here in order to compare it with the average price. So that means we need this price, and as well side by side we need the average price. So that means we need aggregations and details, and that's why we're gonna go with the window function average. So let's go and do it. It's very simple. So it's gonna be the average price. And we don't want to partition the data, so it's going to be an over empty, and this is going to be the average price, like this. So let's go and execute it. And with that, we have calculated the average price. So now we have all the informations in the first step. We have the average price, we have the price, and as well the products. So now the next step is that we have to go and filter the data to find out all the products where the price is higher than the average. That means we will do this step based on those information that we have now. So that means we have to go and use the logic of subquery and main query. Since this is the first step to prepare the data, we're gonna use this as a subquery. So we're gonna call this a subquery, like this. And we have to go and use it in the main query. So how are we gonna do that? We have to go and write the main query. So it's gonna be, I'm gonna start over here, select, and then I will take all the columns from. So this is the main query. Let me just make this a little bit smaller. And what we're gonna do now? So now the main query gonna get the data from the subquery. So the whole thing gonna be used inside the from clause. So now in order to put the subquery inside the main query, we have to go and use the parentheses. So we're gonna have it at the start and as well at the end. And what we usually do, we go and add like a tab in order to understand, okay, this is the subquery. and then this is the main query. So now one more thing that we have to add for the whole subquery in the SQL Server, that we have to give it an alias. So you can go and give it any name that you would like. I usually go with only one character with the T. It stands for table, so you can use anything that you want, but we have in SQL Server to give an alias for the subquery. So now what we are saying select everything from the subquery. If you go over here and execute it, you will get the exact same results because the main query is doing nothing. It's saying just select everything from the subquery. But now in order to solve the task, we are not interested with all products. We are interested only the products where the price is higher than the average. That's why we have to go and use the where clause. So we're gonna say where the price is higher than the average price. So this filtering is done in the main query. It's not inside the subquery. So now that means in the main query we are doing something. Let's go and execute it. And with that we solve the task. We are getting now two products where the price is higher than the average price. So as you can see, it's very simple. If the task has multiple steps, then we can do that using multiple subqueries until we have the main query. And we can learn from this that the subquery is only to support the main query. So we are preparing here that all the data that we need in order to have the final result for the main query. So for this task, we cannot go immediately calculating the results. We have first, so for this kind of task, we cannot immediately put everything in one select query. We have first to prepare the data in one subquery and then pass the values for the main query. And this is what we mean with the table subquery. And here one quick tip for you: if you would like to see the intermediate results that we are getting from the subquery, you can go and highlight the subquery itself without the parentheses. So we are just highlighting the subquery. You can go now and execute it. And with that, SQL will not go and execute everything. SQL can execute only what you are highlighting. So this is a really nice way in order to see the results of the subquery. As you are debugging or searching for errors, you can go and see the intermediate results that is used from the main query. And of course, if you deselect and not highlight anything and execute, SQL can go and execute everything, the whole query. So this is how we use the table subquery inside the from clause. Alright, so let's have another task, and it says rank the customers based on their total amount of sales. So again, if you check here, we have two steps. First, we have to find the total amount of sales, and then after that, we have to go and rank the customers. So again, we have two steps, and we can use the subqueries in order to solve it. So let's start with the first step, where we're going to find the total amount of sales. So let's go and select the customer ID and as well the sales from the table sales orders. Let's go and execute it. So now in the output, we have multiple customers and their sales. We have to go and now find the total amount of sales for each customer. That means we have to go and use the group by. So we're going to go and summarize the sales. So total sales, and then group up the data by the customer ID. So like this, let's go and execute it. Now, as you can see in the output, we have 4 customers and we have the total sales for each customer. And with that, we have solved the first step. We have the total amount of sales for each customer, and we have now prepared the data for the next query in order to rank the customers. So now I think you're already getting how important are the subqueries in order to do step-by-step analysis. So this is our subquery. Now we need the main query. So I will start preparing it. So main query like this, and let's go first and select everything. So select star from, let me just make this a little bit bigger, like this. And now we have to go and convert this query to a subquery. So we need the parentheses. So the starting and the ending, and for the SQL Server, I'm going to give it an alias. And I would like to push everything to the right side. So let's go and execute it. Perfect. So it is working. With that, the subquery is passing the data in the from clause to the main query. Now, of course, the main query is useless. It's just selecting the data. We have to go and calculate the rank. And for that, we have a very nice window function. So we're going to go and use the rank. So it doesn't need any parameters over. We have to sort the data order by. So we have to go and sort the data by the total sales, descending from the highest to the lowest. So we're going to go with the total sales and descending. So now as you can see, we are using the total sales that we have already prepared in the subquery. So without preparing first the data, we will not be able to rank the customers in the main query. So that's it. Let's go and execute it. And with that, SQL sorted our data and we have a nice ranking based on the data that we had from the subquery. So this is the highest customer with the sales and then the customer number 1 and so on. So again, in this task, we have like multiple steps and we use the power of the subqueries in order to do it step by step. So that's all on how to use the subquery inside the from clause. Okay, so now let's see quickly how SQL executed our query. So we have here our query and we are querying the table orders. So the first step is that SQL gonna go and identify the subquery and then it's gonna go and execute it. So SQL gonna go and execute the subquery part where we are aggregating the data based on the customer ID. So once the subquery is executed, the next step is that the result gonna be introduced as an intermediate results. So these results, we will not see it in the output. It's gonna be like temporarily saved in the memory. So now the next step is that SQL gonna go to the main query and it's gonna execute it based on the intermediate results. So that means the main query will not go back to the original table. It's gonna go and query the intermediate results. So here what SQL gonna do, gonna go and rank the intermediate results by introducing a new column where we see the ranks 1, 2, 3, 4. And the output of the main query gonna be the final results. So as you can see, it's very simple. First, SQL is executing the subquery and the result of the subquery gonna be used in the main query. And once the main query is executed, we will get the final results. So the subquery here is only supporting the main query. So those are the steps that SQL uses in order to execute the subqueries. So now let's understand how the database server execute the subqueries behind the scenes. Let's go. So now let's say that you are a data analyst and you are writing a query at the client side where you have a subquery inside the main query. So once you go and execute it, what's gonna happen, the database engine gonna go and identify the subquery. And in this situation, the database gonna execute first the subquery. So here subquery is like selecting and retrieving data from the table orders. So that means the database has to retrieve the data from the disk storage, from the user data. So now once the subquery is executed, the result, the intermediate result is going to be stored in the cache. So this means the result of the subquery is temporary and as well very fast to retrieve. And now once the database engine is done with the subquery, it's gonna go and start executing the main query. So let's see, in this scenario, it's completely depending on the result of the subquery. So that means the main query gonna go and interact with the cache storage. So that means now the data gonna be retrieved very fast from the result of the subquery. Once it's done, it's gonna forward the result to the database engine, and the database engine gonna forward the results to the client side. And at your side, you will find the final result. And of course, once everything is executed, the database engine gonna go and clean up the cache. So the subquery results gonna be destroyed and removed completely from the cache in order to have a free space for other queries. So this is how the database server execute the subqueries behind the scenes. Alright, so now I'm going to talk about how to use the subquery in the select clause. So now we typically use the subqueries in the select clause to aggregate the data side by side with the columns of the main query. Okay, so let's check the syntax of the subquery in the select clause. So we start with the simple stuff where we say, okay, let's go and select a column that we want to retrieve from specific table. So nothing new, we are just querying a table. And now what we can do in SQL is that not only we can go and select the columns from specific table, we can go and insert here inside the select another query, like a full query, like select from and where. So again, it's like query inside another query, and we call this, of course, a subquery. In order to tell SQL this is a subquery, we go and add the parentheses. So with that, SQL gonna understand, this is a subquery, and the result of this query gonna be used in the select. So we can handle it like any other column. We can go and give it like an alias. It is here optional and not must to add add an alias. So this inner query, we call it a subquery, and the outer query gonna be the main query. So this is how you put a subquery in the select clause, but there is one rule for this query, that the result of this subquery must be a scalar query. That means the result must be a single value, because otherwise it will not work. SQL here is expecting only one value. So this is how we use the subquery inside the select clause. Alright, let's have the following task, and it says show the product IDs, product names, prices, and the total number of orders. So now if we check the task, there is like two parts. The first part is that we are showing the details about the products, and the second part is that we have to go and calculate the total number of orders. So let's see what we're gonna do. First, let's go and solve this simple part here where we have the product ID, product names, and prices. So we're gonna go and select the product ID and the product, and then the price from the table sales products. Let's go and execute it. So with that, we have solved the first part of the task. We have the details about that products. Now we go and solve the second part. We have to go and calculate the total number of orders. Now this information comes from different table from the products. We cannot calculate it from products. We have to go and query the orders. So now what am I going to do? I'm going to go and calculate this part in separate query instead of having it here inside the products. So let's have a semicolon in order to have a second query. So we're gonna go and select the total number of orders. That means we can go simply do a count star from the table sales orders. Let me just make it a little bit bigger. So we're gonna call it total orders and a semicolon as well. So now if you just execute the whole thing, you will get here like two parts in the results. First, you have the details of the product, and the second part, we have now the total number of orders. We have 10 orders. But now with that, we have like two different queries like separated from each others, and we have two different results. But in the task, we have to show all those informations in one result. So now what we can do, we can put one query inside another query. So now if you check the second query, the total orders, you can see we have only single value. So we have a scalar query, a scalar subquery. That's why we can go with this as a subquery like this, and I'm gonna go and put everything in one line in order to see it. So let's remove the semicolons, we don't need it. And now what we're gonna do, we're gonna go and take the whole thing and put it inside the main query. So this is the main query, and now think about it as new column. So I will put the query here. So it is just one new column in our select, but in order to have it as a subquery, we have to use the parentheses at the start and at the end. And of course, we have to go and give it a name. So I'm gonna go and use the same name over here. So it's gonna be as total orders. So with that, the setup for the subquery is ready, and it is inside the select clause in the main query. Let's go and execute it. Now, as you can see, we have everything together. We have the three informations, the product details, and as well side by side with the total orders. And since it is always the same value, it's gonna go and be repeated for each row. So this is what we call scalar subquery inside the select clause. And here again, very important to understand, if you are using a subquery inside the select clause, only the scalar subquery is allowed. So for example, instead of having one value from the aggregation, we can go and use the order ID. So let's see what's gonna happen. We will get an error. It's gonna say subquery is returning more than one value, and this is not allowed because we are using the subquery in the select clause. So that's why we have to have only one value, and by using the aggregation you will get one value. So let's repair it, and it's working. And now again, if you'd like only to see the result from the subquery, what you can do, you can go and highlight the subquery like this, without the parentheses of course, and you go and execute it. And with that, you can see in the output that 10, this is the intermediate results that's going to be passed to the main query. And if you want the whole thing to be executed, just like unmark it and execute. And with that, everything can be executed, the subquery and the main query. So this is the scalar subquery in the select clause. Okay, so now let's see quickly how SQL executed this query step by step. So this is our original query, and we need two tables from our database for it. So the first step is that SQL can go and identify the subquery and and it's gonna go and execute it. So this is the first step. So the query is targeting the orders table, and we are just simply doing a count. So in the output, we will get an intermediate result where we are counting the number of rows of the orders. Now the next step is that SQL gonna go and pass this value to the main query. So this is the second step. And if you go and pass this value to the main query, it's gonna look like this. So you are saying product ID, product, and the 10. So after SQL prepared the main query, SQL gonna go and execute it. So this time we are targeting the products, and in the output we will get all the information from the products without any filter, because here we don't have any where clause, and the final results we will get it like this. So we will have the product ID, the product, and the total that we got it from the subquery. So as you can see here, the subquery here is a scalar subquery where we have only one single value. So again, it's very simple. Always SQL starts with the subquery, and then it's gonna go and pass the values to the main query, and at the end the main query gonna be executed, and we will get the final result from it. So this is how SQL executed our query. Alright, next we're going to talk about how to use the subquery in the join clause. Alright, so now as we are joining tables in SQL, sometimes we have to go and prepare the data before doing the join to dynamically create a result sets for joining with another table. So again here, we cannot join tables directly, we have to do a preparation step before doing the joins. Okay, let's have the following task, and it says, show all customer details and find the total orders of each customer. Now, of course, in SQL, you don't have only one solution, you have multiple solutions, but I would like to solve this task using the subquery. So now if you check the task, we have like two parts. The first part, we have to show all the customer details, and the second part, we have like here an aggregation, find the total orders of each customer. So now let's solve those different parts using two different queries. Let's start with the easiest one, show all customer details. So I think this is very simple. So select star from sales customers. So let's go and execute it. So in the output, we have all the details about the customers, and we have solved the first part. Very simple. Now let's go and solve the second part. We have to find the total number of orders of each customer. That means, let me just have a semicolon over here. We have to go to the table orders. So let's go and select first the order ID, customer ID, from the table sales orders like this. So I will just highlight the second query and execute it. Now in the output, we have 10 orders and we have the different customers. Now in order to find the total orders for each customer, we have to go and use the group by. In order to do that, it's very simple. We're gonna go over here and say, so count. Let's go with the star, and then we're gonna go and group up the data by the customer ID. I will go and call this total orders. So let's go and execute only this part. And with that, we have 4 customers and we have the total number of orders. So with that, we have solved the second part of the task. So now what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna go and execute both of those queries using the semicolon separately. Like this. I will just make this a little bit bigger. So let's go and execute it. Now in the output, we have the two results, all details about the customers and the total number of orders for each customer. So now what we want to do is to go and combine those two results in one. And in order to do that, we can use the joins. So now we have to think about what is the first query, what is the second query. Since the first query returns all the customers that we have in the database, I would like to have this as the left table. And since in the second query we have only 4 customers, I would like to have it then as the right table, and I will go with the left join so that I don't miss any customer, because if I do the inner join I will lose the customer number 5. So let's go and do that. So this is the first query in the main query, so I'm gonna call this main query. Now I'm gonna give this as well an alias like the C, and now we're gonna go and join this table from the database together with the result, the output of this query. So that means we're gonna do it like this, left join, and now we're gonna join with a subquery. So we will have our parentheses. I will just put here a few spaces so that it's clear it is a subquery, and we need for this an alias. So let's go and say, for example, the O. So with that, we are joining a table with the result of a subquery. And now, of course, what is missing is joining the tables using a key. Now, if you check the two results, you can see in both queries, we have the customer ID. That's why we're gonna join with the customer ID. So on, then the customer ID with the customer ID from the subquery. Like this. So we have everything. Let's go and execute it. Now, as you can see in the output, we have all the details about the customer and as well together with the total number of orders for each customer. Together with the total number of orders for each customer. And as you can see, we didn't miss any customer. So we have all the customers from the database and we can see that Anna doesn't have any orders. Now you might say, you know what, we have here the customer ID twice. So what I'm gonna do, I will select all the columns from the customers, but from the subquery, I'm interested only on the total orders. So like this, let's go and execute it. Let's make this a little bit smaller. So now the results are really clean. We have all details from the customers and as well the total orders of each customer. And of course, as we learned, if you would like to check the results from only the subquery, you go and highlight it and execute it. So as you can see, you can put the subqueries almost everywhere. And this is how we use subqueries inside joins. Okay, so now we're going to focus on how to use the subquery in the where clause. So now in SQL, as we learned, we can go and filter the tables using the where clause by using like static values. But now in real data projects, we're going to go and filter the data based on like complex logic. So now in order to prepare this complex logic, we go and use the subqueries in order to make like dynamic filtering for our main tables. And now in order to filter data using the where clause, we have to go and use operators. And we can split it into like two groups. We have the comparison operators and another set, we can call it logical operators, or sometimes we call it subqueries operators. So now first we're going to talk about the comparison operators. So they are operators that we can use in order to compare two values in order to help us filtering the data based on specific condition. And now in SQL basics, we have learned that we have different comparison operators and they are very simple. So in order to compare two values, we have operator like the equal. We have as well not equal, the opposite. So we have greater than, less than, and as well we have greater than or equal to, and the last one we have less than or equal to. So they are very simple. Now instead of comparing two values, we're gonna go and compare a value with the result of subquery using the comparison operators. Alright, let's check the syntax of the subquery inside the where clause using the comparison operators. So we start with the standard stuff where we say select few columns that we want to retrieve and we want to get the data directly from specific table in our database. And now we come to the where condition where we want to filter the table. So we say where and then we select specific column from the table 1. Now since we are talking about the comparison operators, we can go with the operator, for example, equal, and usually we go and specify here like static value like a number or a string. But instead of having a static value, what we can do, we can get the value from another select statements. Another query, like here we're saying select a column from table 2 and with the filter. So now whatever comes from this subquery gonna be used in order to filter the table number 1. And of course we are telling SQL this is a subquery by defining the parentheses at the start and at the end, and the outer query gonna be the main query. So as you can see, we are using the subquery in order to filter the main query. And here in SQL, if you are using subquery with the comparison operators, we have a rule. The subquery must be a scalar subquery, so only one single value. So that's all about how to use the subquery in the where clause using the comparison operators. Alright, so now we have again the same task and it says find the products that have a price higher than the average price of all products. We have solved this task already using the subquery inside the from clause, but now we're gonna go and solve it again using the subquery, but this time inside the where clause. So let's do it step by step. Let's go and get the informations that we need. So we need the product ID, we need the price from the table, sales, products. So let's go and execute it. So now we got the list of all products, but we have to go and filter those informations using the column price. So with that in the results, we got all the products, but we don't need all the products. We need only the products where the price is higher than the average. That means we have to go and filter the table based on the values of the price. So now in order to do that, what we're gonna do, we're gonna use the where clause, and we have to go and filter the data based on the price. And since we need higher than, we're going to go and use the comparison operator, higher than. And now next we need the value average price. So how are we gonna do it? We don't have the average price like out of the box in the table products. We have to go and calculate it. That's why we're gonna go and write another query where we're gonna go and find the average price from the table sales products like this. So now let's go and highlight it and then execute it. And with that, we got now the average price of all products. And as you can see in the output, we have only one single value. So this is a scalar query. So now what we need this value in order to be used in order to filter the first query. So that's why the first query is the main query, bigger. The second one is the subquery that's gonna support the main query in order to filter the data. So now what we're gonna do, we're gonna take the subquery and use it in the where clause. And now of course we have to tell SQL this is a subquery. That's why we have to put it inside two parentheses. So with that we have the subquery inside the where clause in order to filter the main query. So let's go and execute it. And now as you can see in the output, we have now only two products where the price is higher than the average price. So with that we have solved the task, but this time using the subquery in the where clause in order to filter the main query. And of course, in order to see this value in our select, since it is a scalar subquery, we can as well go over here and put it in our select just in order to see the value. So average price. So let's go and execute it. And with that, we can see as well in our results the average price. So this is how we use the subquery in the where clause using the comparison operator. Okay, so let's see quickly how SQL execute our query step by step. So as usual, first SQL gonna go and identify the subquery. It's gonna be our select average price and so on. And now the next step, SQL gonna go and execute our subquery. So it is based on the products. And since we are doing aggregations without group by, at the output we will get only one value. So the average is going to be 20. This value is stored intermediately in the memory, so we will not see it in the output. SQL going to go and pass this value to the main query. So the main query is going to look like this. We are selecting few columns from the table and we are filtering the data based on the price that is higher than the value 20 that we got it from the subquery. So now once SQL have everything for the main query, SQL gonna go and execute it. So SQL gonna go to the products and only select the products where the price is higher than 20. So it's only those two rows, and in the output we will get the final results, the two products as well. So product ID and product price. So that's it. It's very simple. This is how SQL executed our query. So as usual, first starting with the subquery, passing the value to the main query, and at the end, so the main query can be executed with the informations from the subquery, and we will get at the end the final results. So that's it. Alright, so now we're going to talk about the second group of operators, and we're going to start with the in operator. So what is in operator? As we learned before in the comparison operators, we can go and filter the data based on only one single value. But now in some scenarios, we have to go and filter the data based on multiple values, not only one. In this case, we can go and use the in operator. So if you go and use the in operator, it's going to go and check whether the value matches any value from a list. So a list of multiple values. If it matches any of them, so we will get it true. Okay, so now let's have a quick look to the syntax of the subquery using the in operator. So we start with the classic stuff where we say, okay, we would like to retrieve the column 1, column 2 from the table 1, and we want to filter the data based on the column from the table 1. Now after specifying the column, we're gonna use the in operator, and after that we can go and specify static values, but since we are talking about the subqueries, the values gonna come from another query. So here we have another select statements from table 2, and we filter the data for this query, and now the result of this subquery gonna be used in order to filter the data using the in operator. And now the big difference between the in operator and the comparison operators is that the subquery is allowed to have multiple rows. So there is no rule about having like one single value scalar subquery. We can have in the result a list of multiple values. So this is the syntax of the subquery using the in operator. Alright, let's practice using this task. It says show the details of orders made by customers in Germany. So let's see how we can solve this task. First, it needs the details of orders. So as we know, we have the table sales orders. So let's go and execute it. So in the output, we have all orders and with all details. But for the task, we don't need all the orders. We need only the orders that made by customers from Germany. So now if you check the table orders, you don't find any information about the countries, right? So we have to go and get it from another table. And as we know, we can find these informations in the table customers. So let's build another query. So let's say select star from sales customers, like this. So let's go and execute only the second query like this. Now, as you can see in the customers, we have the country column, and this is exactly what we need. So now let's make a list of all customers from Germany. So we don't need all customers. We need only the one that come from Germany. That's why we're going to go and use the where clause, and we say country equal to the value Germany, like this. So let's go and execute it again and check the results. Now in the output, we have our German customers, number 1 and number 4. So now we're going to go and use this information in order to filter the table orders. So let's go back to the table orders over here. And here we have the customer ID informations. And as we can see, we need the orders where the customer is either 1 or 4. Now, in order to filter that, we're going to go to the first query and use the where clause like this, and say the customer ID. So now since we have like two values, 1 and 4, we can go and use the operator in. So let's go and use the in, and let's go and build the list. So let's go and have the 1 and 4. So let's go and execute it. Now we can see the results. We have the orders, but only from the customers 1 and 4. So with that, we have solved the task. We have the details of orders made by customers in Germany, right? And now, of course, this is really bad solution, because what about if we get like in the future a new customer? You don't want to go and keep adding here like values and so on for each time you have a new customer. We want to make the values for this list to be dynamic. So we don't need a static value, we need like dynamic values, and we can use the subqueries in order to retrieve those informations, right? And we have it already in the second query. So let's go back to the second query over here. We need only those two values, 1 and 4. That's why we're gonna go to the query and say, okay, let's retrieve the customer ID. So let's go and execute it again. And with that, we have with the 1 and 4 exactly like we have it here in the first query. And now, of course, in the future, if there's like another customer that come from Germany, this list is gonna be a little bit longer. So this query gonna always retrieve all the customer IDs that have the country equal to Germany. So now what we're gonna do, we're gonna take this as a subquery. Now let's go and get everything from it and now put it instead of those static values. So of course we're gonna go now and put few spaces to the right side in order to understand this is subquery. And of course here we don't use any aliases. So now what we are doing, the results from this subquery gonna be used in order to filter our main query. So let me just call it main query, like this, and make this smaller. So let's go and execute it. And now we are getting the same results. We are getting all the orders from only the customers 1 and 4 where they come from Germany. And these informations come dynamically from the subquery. And we don't have to worry about new customers from Germany. It's going to be added here automatically. And this query can always return all the orders from Germany. So this is the power of the subquery together with the in operator if you are having like multiple values, multiple rows. So we have solved the task. All right, now one more thing. Let's say that the task is exactly the opposite. It says show the details of orders made by customers who don't come from Germany. So now here there's like two ways in order to do it. Either you go to the subquery and you say, you know what, the country should not be equal to Germany. So if you go and execute it, you will get all the customers' IDs that are not from Germany, and if you execute the whole thing, you will get all the orders where the customers are not from Germany. So either you do that, or you stay with the equal to Germany, but you go and convert the whole logic by using the operator not. So now we are saying the customer ID should not be equal to one of those values. So it should not be equal to 1 or 4. And for that, we are using the not in operator. So let's go and execute it. So now with that, we are getting all the orders where the customers don't come from Germany by just using not in operator. So that's all about the not in and the in operators. Alright, so now let's see step by step how SQL execute our query. So we are targeting two tables, the customers and the orders. So the first step is that SQL gonna go and identify the subquery and it's gonna go and execute it. So the subquery here is filtering the data based on the country. So the query gonna be executed and in the output we will get only two rows. So it is one column with multiple rows. This is the row subquery and this is our intermediate results where it's gonna be passed to the main query. So our main query gonna look like this. We are selecting few informations from the orders and we are filtering the table orders based on the customer ID, where we are saying the customer ID must be one of those values, 1 or 4. So the subquery here is supporting the main query with the informations for the filter. Now once SQL have everything, SQL gonna go and execute our main query and this is gonna be like the following. So we will start with the first row and here the customer ID is equal to 2. So the value 2 is not equal to 1 or 4. That's why this row will be excluded from the final results. Now let's move to the second row. We have here the value 3. And the value 3 is not equal to one of those values. That's why this value gonna be as well failing. So we will not have it at the output. And then SQL gonna go to the next one. Now this time the customer ID is 1 and it is equal to one of those values. It's equal to 1. So we have a match. That's why this row will be included to the results. And the same thing for the next row because we have the customer ID 1 and so on. Now after SQL checking all those customer IDs, whether they are in the list 1 or 4, we will get the final results where we have here all the orders where the customer ID either 1 or 4. So this is how SQL executed the in operator using the subqueries. Okay, so now moving on to the any operator. So we can go and use the any operator in order to compare value if it matches any value from a list. So that means we can go and use it in order to check whether a condition is true for at least one of the values in a list. Okay, so now let's check quickly the syntax of the subquery using the any and all operators. So as we learned before, we can go and use a subquery inside the where clause in order to filter the main query using like the comparison operators like here less than. Now the syntax of the any operator is that you're gonna go and use the comparison operator and after that immediately you use the keyword any. And for the all operator, it's gonna be exactly the same, where you're gonna go and put after the comparison operator the keyword all. So the syntax is very simple. We just add those keywords. So let's practice using the following task. Find female employees whose salaries are greater than the salaries of any male employee. So that means we want to go and compare the salaries between the male and female, and specifically we are searching for female employees whose salary is greater than at least one male employee. So let's solve it step by step. Let's go and start selecting few informations, like for example the employee ID and first name, gender, salary from the table sales employees. So let's go and execute it. So now we have like 5 employees, 3 of them are male and 2 are female. So now since we want to compare the data between male and female, let's go and create 2 queries. The first one is filtering the data based on the gender. So the first one is for the female. So and we can go and remove this information over here. Let me just make this a little bit smaller and zoom out. And the second query, it's gonna be the exact opposite. Let's go and get employee informations for the male. So let's go and execute it. Now the first results are the female employees and the second one are. So now for the first result is for the female employees and the second one is for the male employees. So now what do we need in the output? We need the female employees. That means this is going to be our main query. So we are focusing on the female employees and we are using the male employees only as a filter. And what do we need? We need only the salary informations. That's why we can prepare it like this. I will just put everything in one line to make it clear. So this is going to be our subquery. So now we're going to go and work with the main query where we're going to add one more filter where we're going to filter the data based on the salary, right? So we're going to say if the salary is greater than, and now we need the values from the subquery, right? So this is our subquery. We're gonna put it like this, and don't forget about the parentheses at the start and at the end. And I would like still to have those two queries. So let's go and execute it. And now we will get an error, and that's because our subquery is returning multiple rows, and this is not acceptable. We are using the comparison operator, and SQL expect from the subquery to have scalar subquery, so only one single value. But now in order to solve this issue, we can go and use the logical operators, either all or any. So now since we are saying it's enough for the salary of the female employee to be higher than at least one male employee, we will go with the operator any. So let's go after the comparison operator and have the keyword any, and let's go and execute it again. And now as you can see in the output, we got only one female employee where her salary is higher to one of those male employees. So let me just go and get the first name as well from the second query, just to have it like this. So now if you go and compare the salary of Mary, it is not higher than Michael, but it is higher than Frank and Kevin. And since we are using the any operator, it's enough for Mary to have salary higher to one of those values. In this case, it's higher than both Frank and Kevin, and the condition is fulfilled. That's why we are getting the Mary. And the other female, let me just check. Oh, do we have else? So we have Carol. His salary is less than all the salaries of the male employees. So it must be at least higher than one of the male employees. So with that, we have solved the task, right? Alright, so now we have another operator that is similar. We call it the all operator. We can go and use it in order to compare a value if it matches all values in a list. So that means we can go and use it if we need to check whether a condition is true every value in a list. I know that might sound a little bit complicated, but don't worry about it, we can have examples. Now let's say that our task says find female employees whose salary are greater than the salaries of all male employees. So that means now the condition is more restrictive. Mary should now has a salary higher than every male employee. So it should be higher to all those values that we have from the male employees. And of course, in this scenario, it's not, because we have Michael. Mary has less salaries than Michael, and this is a problem because Mary should has higher salary than everyone. So let's go and try it. If I go and write here all, and let's go and execute it, you will see we will not find any results that fulfill this requirement. So we don't have any female employee who her salary is higher than all male employees, and that's because we have a very small data set. So this is how we use all and any operators in our subqueries in SQL. Alright, so with that we have covered almost everything about how to use the subqueries in different locations and clauses, but we didn't talk about the exist operator, and that's because I would like you to understand a very important concept in the subqueries, where we have two different types of the subqueries based on the dependencies: the non-correlated and correlated subqueries. And after that, we're gonna go back to the exist operator. Alright friends, so now we come to the part where it is a little bit complicated about the subqueries. Now we're gonna talk about the dependencies between the subquery and the main query. So far, all the examples and the subqueries that we have learned were a non-correlated subquery. A non-correlated subquery means a subquery that can run independently from the main query. So that means the subquery is like standalone query. But in the other hand, we have the exact opposite type of the subquery. We have the correlated subquery. A correlated subquery is a subquery that relies on values from the main query for each row it processes. So that means the subquery here is completely depending on the main query. So I know this might be a little bit confusing. That's why we can have the following very simple sketch in order to exactly understand how this works. So as usual, we have a database tables, and now this time SQL gonna go and start executing the main query first. This is the first thing happens. So the main query gonna go and query the database in order to get results, and SQL gonna process the results row by row. So now what's gonna happen? The main query gonna go and pass the first row informations to the subquery. So now the subquery gonna get the data from the main query. So SQL gonna execute the subquery. So here the subquery gonna return a value, like for example 1. So here it's very important to understand that now the SQL or the main query gonna check, is there a result from the subquery? In this example, yes, we have a result. So here SQL is checking the output for the subquery for the first row. So if there is a result, SQL gonna go and return the row in the final result. So this is the whole iteration happened only for the first row. So we're gonna process the whole thing again from the start for the second row. So the main query gonna get the second row from the database and it's gonna pass it to the subquery. Once the subquery gets this new informations, SQL gonna go and execute the subquery once again. So now let's say that after executing the subquery, there were no results. So the subquery is not returning anything after the execution. So now what can happen? SQL and the main query gonna check, okay, there is no result from the subquery, and this means this row should be excluded and not presented in the output. So we will not see this row at the output. So as you can see, SQL is executing the subquery once again for the second row. So this will keep happening as long as we have row. For example, we have another row, the main query gonna pass it to the subquery gonna be executed for the third time, and the result of the subquery is gonna be 1. So the same thing gonna happen, SQL gonna check it, okay, we have a value, so this row is allowed to be in the final results. And so on, the cycle gonna keep repeating for each row that's gonna be retrieved from the main query. And once we have processed all the rows, the final result gonna be presented in the output. So what we have understood so far, the correlated subqueries is always depending on the main query, and the subquery gonna be executed for each row that we're gonna get from the main query. So in this example, we have 4 rows and the subquery is executed 4 times. So this is how the correlated subquery works. It's a little bit more complicated than the non-correlated subquery. The non-correlated subqueries are really straightforward. So first, the subquery gonna go and execute the database only once, and the output of the subquery gonna be like an intermediate result that's gonna be used from the main query. So the main query gonna go and query the intermediate results, and in the output we're gonna get the final results. So as you can see in the execution of the non-correlated subquery, it is straightforward. There is no iterations. Everything gonna be executed only once. So now if you compare them side by side, you can see that with the non-correlated subquery, it is completely independent from the main query. So that means the subquery gonna be executed only once, and after that SQL gonna go and it will execute the main query only once using the result from the subquery. But on the left side, the subquery is gonna be executed multiple times and it is completely depending on the main query, and there is like an iteration for each row that's gonna be retrieved from the main query. So the process is gonna be cycling until all the rows are processed. And this is exactly how the correlated and the non-correlated subqueries work in SQL. Alright, so now let's have the following task, and it says show all customer details and find the total orders of each customer. We have already solved this task, and you know in SQL we don't have only one query in order to solve something. We have multiple ways in order to do it. So we solved this task before using the subqueries and the joins. Now we're gonna go and solve this task using subquery in the select clause, and as well using the correlated subqueries. So again, let's do it step by step. It's very simple. First, we need all the customer details. So as we learned, select star from sales customers. So if you execute it, you will get all the details of all customers. Now we need to find the total number of orders of each customer. Now before we have solved this using a simple query where we have used the count function together with a group by, but this time we can do it a little bit different. So let's go and write query saying select count star from the table sales orders. So now let's go and execute it. With that, we have the total number of orders. So let's go and take this subquery and use it in the select. So we are using it as a scalar subquery. So let's just put it over here, and this is the main query. And in order to make this as a subquery, what we're gonna do, we can have the parentheses and we're gonna say the total sales. So now let's go and execute it. So now as you can see, we have here all the details about the customers and we have the total sales, but we have one issue. We don't need just the total order, we need the total orders for each customer. So each customer has different total orders. So we cannot have like the following setup. We cannot say group by customer ID, and then you have like here the customer ID and so on. So if you go and execute it, you will get a problem, and that's because if you go and execute this subquery over here, you will get like multiple rows and multiple columns. So you have like a table query, and this type of subquery is not allowed to be used in the select clause, right? We have to have only scalar subquery. So that's why we cannot do that. So we have to go and remove all those stuff. But we can go and solve it using the correlated subqueries. So now the subquery is completely independent from the main query. So in order to correlate it, what we're gonna do, we're gonna go and connect it. So I'm gonna give aliases for the tables, and I'm gonna say where the customer ID equal to the customer ID from the main query from the customers. So again, we are connecting the customer ID from the orders in the subquery with the customer ID from the table customers that comes from the main query. So now we are saying, okay, execute this only for a specific customer, not for the whole table. So let's go and execute it. So now in the output, we have the total sales for each customer, and we don't have here like the total sales in the whole table orders. And that's because what is happening for each row, the subquery gonna be executed. So for the customer number 1, this query gonna be executed like this. Count the total number of orders where the customer ID equal to the 1. So let me just show you what this means. If I go and remove this from here and just put the number 1. So if I go and execute this, you will see the customer ID 1 has 3 orders. And let's just put it back and execute. And the same thing gonna happen for each customer. So for each customer, for each row, this subquery gonna be executed, and it can be filtered with the customer ID that comes from the main query. So this is another way on how to solve this task using the correlated subqueries. So now let's summarize and understand quickly what are the differences between the non-correlated and the correlated subqueries. So now if you are talking about the definition, the non-correlated subquery are subqueries that are independent of the main query, but in the other hand, the correlated subqueries are dependent of the main query. And now if you are talking about the execution, the non-correlated subquery is going to be executed only once, and then the result is going to be used by the main query. But by the correlated subqueries, the subquery going to be executed for each row that we have from the main query. And as we learned, for the non-correlated subqueries, we can execute it on its own. So we can go and select it and execute it, but the correlated subqueries, we cannot execute it on its own. So we have to execute always the whole thing. And if you are talking about which one is easier, I think it's clear that the non-correlated subqueries are easier to write and to read. And in the other hand, the correlated subqueries are harder to read, and as well it's complex. Now, if you are talking about the performance of the database, since the correlated subquery is going to be executed only once, this of course is going to lead to have better performance because things are really straightforward and not complicated. But in the other hand, with the correlated subqueries, there is more effort because SQL has to check a lot of stuff and the subquery gonna be executed many times. So the non-correlated subqueries are faster. We use the non-correlated subqueries in order to do static comparison. So the value that we are getting from the subquery is executed only once, and we will get only one static value in order to use it for filtering and so on. But in the other hand, we use correlated subqueries in order to do row by row comparison. And since we don't have here a static value, each time the subquery gonna run, we're gonna have different results. This can add more dynamic to the filters, and we don't have a static value. So those are the big differences between the non-correlated and the correlated subqueries. Alright, so now after we understood the concept of the two types, correlated and non-correlated subqueries, we're gonna go now and cover the last operator for the subqueries. We have the exists. So what is exist operator? Alright, so now we're going to talk about a very interesting operator function in SQL, the exists. So now in some scenarios, as you are querying the data from one table, you would need to go and check whether the rows of this table exist in another table. So that means you are checking like the existence of your rows in different table. And exactly in this scenario, we go and use subqueries together with the operator exists. So the exist operator is very simple. It just simply check whether the subquery returns any results, any rows. Alright, so now let's understand the syntax of the correlated subqueries using the exist operator. This is gonna be a little bit complicated, but we're gonna do it step by step, don't worry about it. So let's start with the easy stuff. In the main query, we're gonna go and write a simple select. We are selecting few columns from the table 2, and now we don't need all the data from table 2. We want to filter the table using the where clause. Now what we're gonna do after the where clause, we're gonna write immediately another keyword called exists. So we don't here specify any column before the exist like we have done in the comparison operator or the in operator. We don't need that because we are not filtering based on a value, we are filtering based on a logic. That's why we have the word exist immediately. And now directly after the exist, we're gonna go and define the subquery like this. So we're gonna start saying select one from the table number 1. Well, it is not like a must or something, but it is very commonly used to specify here a 1. We are not using the subquery in order to retrieve informations from the table 1. We are just testing whether the subquery gonna return a value or not. And we don't care about the returned value. It could be 1, it could be a column, it could be anything. So we don't care about the data that is retrieved. We are just care whether the subquery is returning anything. So that's why we go and write any value like here a 1. So now we are not done yet. This subquery is not yet connected to the main query. We have somehow to go and connect them together, and we can do that using the where clause, where we go and connect the ID from the table 1 from the subquery with the ID from the outer query from the main query. And with that we are building like a relationship between the subquery and the main query. So with that, the subquery is now depending on the values from the main query, because here we have the table 2 ID. So the IDs from the main query gonna filter the subquery. So this is the syntax of correlated subqueries using the exist, where we are making the subquery depending totally on the main query. So let's understand how exist works. So now for each row that we have from the main query, it's gonna trigger and cause an execution of the subquery. This subquery gonna help us to evaluate this row. So we are testing this row. Now if the subquery doesn't return anything, so there is no results, what can happen? The row that we are evaluating from the main query will be excluded from the final results. But now in the other hand, if the subquery is returning a value, so we have like some kind of results, then this row that we are evaluating gonna be included in the final results. So the subquery here is used in order to do a test. Do we have a result or we don't? And based on this, SQL either gonna include or exclude the row from the final results. So this is the logic behind the exists in SQL. Alright, so now we're gonna go and solve the same task using the exists. So the task says, show the details of orders made by the customers in Germany. So we have already solved this task using the in operator and the subquery. Now we're gonna go and solve it using the exists. So again, we're gonna have the same logical steps that we have done before. So first we're gonna go and select all the details from the table sales orders. So let's execute it, and with that we have all the orders and all the details. But of course we don't need all those informations, we need only the orders that's made by customers from Germany. So that is the first query. Let's go and construct the second query. We're gonna say select star from sales customers, but we don't need all the customers, we need only the customers from country equal to the value Germany. So let's go and execute it. So now we have all customers that come from Germany. Now we have to go and put those two queries together in order to get the final results. So as we learned before, the second query is going to be our subquery. So it's going to be supporting the first query in order to filter the data. So the first query is going to be our main query. Let me just make this smaller. And the text as well. Now we don't need all the orders, right? We need only the orders where the customer come from Germany. So we need the where clause. So now we can have the filter logic like this. Show the order details only if the customer ID exists from the subquery. And now we have to go and put our subquery. So our subquery is gonna be this one over here. So let's just move it to the right side. And In order to have it as a subquery, we have to close the parenthesis. And now since exist is correlated subquery, we cannot have it like this. We have to go and connect the subquery together with the main query. So now the subquery is currently independent from the main query because we want to check each order information from the order table to check whether the customer exists in the subquery. We're gonna go and add the condition like the following, and now it's like the joins. We have to go and connect the customer IDs together. So we're gonna go over here and give it like an alias and as well for the subquery. And now we're gonna say customer ID from the orders should be equal to the customer ID from the subquery, the table customers like this. So again, this customer ID comes from the subquery and this customer ID comes from the main query. So now since we are using the subquery only in order to test the existence of the customer, so if the subquery returns anything or not, it doesn't matter what you are selecting in the subquery. So you can go with the star or a column or any static value. But for some reason, all the SQL developers decided to go with the static value 1. And of course, you can go and add like a column like the customer ID, but it's like a necessary step for the SQL in order to retrieve the information from the customer ID. So it's going to be way faster for SQL if you say, okay, select 1. So let's stick with the best practices, use the 1 value if you are working with exist. So this is our subquery, and I think we have everything. Let's go and execute it. Now, as you can see in the output, we got all the orders where the customers come from Germany. Now, of course, if you want to go and try another value and execute, you will get exactly the same results. So it doesn't matter which value you are using. So with that, we have solved the task, this time using the exists. Now, if the task says show the details of orders made by customers that don't come from Germany, it's going to be very simple. We're going to go and use the operator not before the exist. So where not exists. So now we are flipping the whole logic and we are saying there should be no matching with the subquery. So now if you go and execute it, you will get all the orders where the customers don't come from Germany by simply using the not logic. And there is one more thing that is annoying about the correlated subqueries if you compare it to the non-correlated subqueries. As we learned before, let me go back to the N operator. Now this is a non-correlated subquery, and if I go and select only the subquery, I can go and execute it independently. So I can go and check the intermediate results and like validate my query. But the problem with the correlated subquery, I cannot go and highlight the subquery and then go and execute it. And that's because in the syntax of the subquery, we are adding a column that is outside our subquery that comes from the main query. So this piece of information currently for the SQL is unknown. And that's why we are getting this error, because SQL saying, okay, I don't know where this column comes from. So this is a little bit annoying. Using the correlated subqueries, you cannot go and test the intermediate results. But how I usually do it, I go and test like an intermediate result for only one row. So for example, I'm gonna go and pick like a customer here, for example 2. So I'm gonna go and say, okay, the customer ID should be equal to 2. So let me just remove this from here. I got this value from the main query. So if I go now and execute it, I can see here, okay, the subquery is not returning anything because there is no such a value. So with that, I'm just testing like one row. And of course, in order to make this working, I have to go and add as well the column from the main query. So this is why correlated subqueries are a little bit more hard to understand compared to the non-correlated, because we cannot go and test the intermediate results like we can do there. So this is another way on how to solve this task using a correlated subqueries with the operator exists. Okay, so now let's see step by step how SQL executed the correlated subqueries using the exists operator. So now this time SQL will not start with the subquery. SQL gonna go and start immediately with the main query. SQL first gonna identify the main query and it's gonna go and execute it, but it's gonna execute it row by row. So the first row gonna be the first customer. So now SQL gonna go and put the first customer under the test. So now the next step is that SQL gonna go and pass the value of the customer ID from the main query to the subquery. So we are doing now exactly the opposite. So now what can happen? SQL gonna prepare the subquery with the following information. So we are saying the customer ID equal to 1, and then SQL gonna go and execute it. So now once SQL executed this query, we will get the result of 1, and that's because we have here multiple times where the customer ID is equal to 1. So there is rows in the order table where the customer ID equal to 1. So now what can happen? The row from the main query gonna pass the test, and this customer gonna be included in the final results. So now the next step of that, SQL gonna go and start testing the second customer. So we're gonna put this customer under the test. Now SQL gonna go and pass the value to the subquery. So here we're gonna have the value of 2, and then SQL gonna go and execute this query, and of course we will get a result because we have here multiple times where the customer ID equal to 2. So that's why in the output of this subquery we will get 1. So now SQL gonna say, great, we have a value from the subquery, that's why it is safe to show this customer in the output. And now SQL gonna go to the next row and so on. So for the next 2 customers, the same thing's gonna happen. All of those customers will have a value from the subquery, and that's why they are all like passing the test. So we will have it in the output. Now SQL gonna go to the last row from the table customers. So we have the Anna, and we're gonna put Anna to the test. So now what's gonna happen? SQL gonna go and pass the value 5 to the subquery, and SQL gonna go and execute this query to the table orders. Now once SQL execute this query, there will be nothing returned, and that's because we don't have here in the table orders a customer ID equal to 5. And now SQL gonna say, well, we are not getting any results from the subquery, that's why this customer gonna fail, and SQL will not show it at the output, so it will be completely removed. So the customer Anna is excluded because the subquery is not returning anything. Customer ID number 5, Anna, does not exist in the table orders. So it's gonna fail the test, and we will have in the final results only 4 customers. So this is exactly the purpose of the exist. We are checking and testing the existence of our rows from another table, from another query. So this is how SQL executes the correlated subqueries using the operator exists. Alright friends, so with that you have covered everything about the subqueries, all the different categories and types of the subqueries. And now we're gonna do a quick recap about the subqueries. So as we learned, subqueries is just simply a query inside another query. And we use the subqueries in order to break down a complex queries into smaller, simpler, easy to manage pieces. That makes everything easier to develop and as well to read. And as we learned, there are like many different use cases for the subqueries. So we use subqueries in order to create temporary result sets to be used later from another query. And we learned that we can use the subqueries in order to prepare the data before joining the tables. And another very important use case for the subquery is that we can use it in order to filter our data using a dynamic and as well complex filter logics. And as we learned, we can go and use the correlated subqueries using the exist operator in order to check the existence of data and rows from another tables. And as well, using the correlated subqueries help us to do row by row comparison. Alright friends, so with that we have now a clear understanding one of the most important concepts in SQL, the subqueries. I promise you're gonna end up using them in each data project. And now in the next chapter we're gonna cover another important concept in SQL, the CTE, Common Table Expression. If you like this video and you want me to create more content like this, I'm gonna really appreciate it if you support the channel by subscribing, liking, sharing, commenting. All those stuff gonna help the channel with the YouTube algorithm, and as well my content gonna reach the others. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next tutorial. Bye.